Federation, and is going to be sharing with us today. Over to you, Will.
Good morning. It is a privilege to be here with you all this morning. As you can hear from my accent, I am not from Europe, nor am I from the UK, which unfortunately is not a part of Europe anymore. Sorry if that's still a sore subject, but I am from Virginia, across the pond in the States, but I have been living in Vienna, Austria for the past 5 years, working with a Baptist church that is actively involved in refugee integration work. So we have a Farsi-speaking congregation, so I hang out with Afghan and Persian folks, a privilege to do that. Through that work with that church, I got more involved with the work of the European Baptist Federation, which is all of the unions of churches that spread from Ireland to the far reaches of Russia, down to Egypt and up. I guess Norway probably wins the most northernmost. So all of the unions there in Europe, in the Middle East, and Central Asia. For a year now, I have been working as the coordinator for migration issues for the European Baptist Federation. And so as you can imagine with all of that, it has been a pretty intense week for me. And it is extremely timely that I am here this week. This visit was completely unrelated to anything regarding Ukraine. I am looking at potentially moving to the UK later in the year, and so was here on a visit. And David, if you're watching at home, thank you for the invitation. I hope that you and the family are doing well. I don't know where the camera is, but yes, David's a good friend that I've met through my work with the EBF. Forgive me if I'm a bit scatterbrained. I've thrown this together. If anyone was sitting next to me, you'd see that I was still frantically writing down notes. It's been quite the crazy week. And to celebrate my 1-year anniversary in work on Wednesday, on March 1st, if that was Wednesday, I think I had 6 different meetings with the crisis core team responding as we talked with the Polish, as we talked with the Ukrainians and the Romanians and the Slovakians and Hungarians and Moldovans and those from further afield asking, how can we help, how can we help, how can we help? You've seen the news. It's been an intense week for all of us, and I'm aware of that. And I want to validate any feelings that you have of stress or anxiety. Because it is a scary time for all of us to see. But I bring some good news in the midst of the suffering. Our brothers and sisters in Ukraine are hanging in there. It has been difficult, but they are hanging in there. Last weekend, they moved their offices of the Baptist Union from Kyiv to Lviv in the west, which has been relatively untouched so far. And God willing, it stays that way. And they are recouping to respond. The Ukrainian Baptists are competing with with Bugby to actually be the largest Baptist union in the EBF. And so depending on who you ask, either they are the largest Baptist union or Bugby is the largest union. But there are about 2,300 churches and 125 members across the country. And so our Baptist brothers and sisters are represented very, very well. Even now as we gather for worship, they are gathered in the underground, in basements, in bomb shelters, and in the West, in their normal sanctuaries. And it's beautiful to think that Amazing Grace is a song that's sung in all languages around. And it is likely that that song was sung by our Ukrainian brothers and sisters in worship this morning as well. War is not new for Ukraine and for our Ukrainian Baptist brothers and sisters since the annexation of Cumbia in 2014 and the invasion in the eastern sections of Ukraine. Ukrainian Baptists have been responding remarkably well for almost a decade now to the invasion of Russia. And so they have mobilized their churches to be able to be places of refuge, to be places of distribution of humanitarian aid, and of safety for those who are fleeing violence. As we were talking with leaders 2 weeks ago, they had a list of plan A, B, C, and D in terms of we are ready to go, depending on if this happens, this happens. Plan D was if Russia fully invaded Ukraine. So they were prepared for it, but no one wanted it. and no one fully believed that it actually would happen. And so this past week has been chaotic for them as they have been preparing for their last plan. But they are responding remarkably well. And in each region of the country, there is one Baptist church that is kind of the key Baptist church. That is a place of humanitarian good distribution as well as refuge. And other churches have been mobilized to be kind of stopover places where people who are fleeing can stop for the night, can rest for a little while, have some food, and then continue their journey on either further west or outside of the country as well. They are showing an incredible resilience in this time, but they are shaken. And it's funny, when I meet with folks from Eastern Europe, they generally are not the most expressive people. Coming from America, I'm used to people being very expressive and maybe a bit over the top, and mostly in their facial expressions, they're quite reserved. And so when you see a Ukrainian start to cry, it makes you cry as well. However, they have told stories of they've had weddings this past week, they've had baptisms this past week, and the church is continuing to live out its mission to be salt and light in the world. Around in the border countries, our Baptist unions are responding remarkably well as well. The numbers are hard to know, but there have been at least 1 million people who have fled over the past week, and it could be up to 1.5 million in the coming days, which someone told me yesterday that the population of the new city of Southend is about 500,000. And so 3 times the population of this area all up and leaving and fleeing. The vast majority are women and children. As with martial law in the country of Ukraine, men are required to stay. And so there have been some heartbreaking goodbyes at the border as people have sometimes passed their children on to complete strangers to connect them with family members in other parts of Europe. We did a mapping exercise last year for the EBF to see what countries were responding to refugees. And on the map, you had pretty much all of Western Europe was responding in some way. The Baltic countries were responding in some way, and in the Balkans and in the Middle East as well. But there was a hole right in the center of Europe, except for Ukraine, because of the work they've been doing with internally displaced peoples over the past years. And so the past year, I've been working with my colleagues on brainstorming of how can we work with our Central European brothers and sisters to be more open to refugees, to be more willing to take in refugees. And so we have been blown away the past week as every single one of those unions, as the Polish, the Slovakians, the Hungarians, the Romanians, the Moldovans, all have opened up their doors, as churches smaller than this have taken all of their seats and pews out and thrown them up on the stage and filled the sanctuary with cots for people to sleep. The Polish are doing especially astounding work. The majority of refugees are going into Poland because of the close relationship with countries over the past few years. You had churches that had capacity to take 40 to 50 people who have been housing 150 up to 200 per night. As people are traveling through. One particular church, a month ago, the pastor had conversations with its leadership that said, we might need to close our church and sell the building because it was not being used. They didn't have the numbers after the pandemic, and it was becoming too much to keep the heating up. And this is one of the churches that had 200 people. That had just children running around as it was bustling and full of life. And they said, this is why our church is here. You can't really tell the difference in those churches between who's Ukrainian, who has fled, and who's Polish, who is working alongside them. Everyone is blending together to serve, together to cook, to clean, and to make sure that everyone is taken care of. And we've seen things similarly in other churches and other unions around. The Hungarians have a group called the Hungarian Baptist Aid, which is an extremely professional aid organization that has responded to needs in the past. And so they have been our main partner on working to get humanitarian aid into Ukraine. And they are doing incredible work. And I was told that last week they were actually mentioned on the BBC. So they're internationally renowned for the work that they're doing. And then the response from across the globe of Baptists around the world, it's been swift and immense. I've been on multiple prayer calls where we've had 150, 200, 250 people from around the world to pray and to come together. I have been exceptionally proud to be a Baptist this week, and you all should be as well, because your brothers and sisters are being Christ in such a beautiful and profound way this past week. As I said, it was a tumultuous week for me, and as you can see, like some of you, I've been on the brink of tears multiple times, and it's been one of the most intense weeks of my life. But I'm so thankful for some of. I'm just thankful for the Bible and the stories that we have from there that come up during these times, and things that I've been thinking about, and stories that have resonated with me as I've tried to process the trauma of this experience. The past years, as I've started to work with refugees, my eyes have been opened to read Scripture in a completely new way. Before, I never read Scripture from the perspective of a refugee, and it was all kind of maybe a bit bland and boring. But once you start to read with those eyes, you see, especially in the Old Testament, this is a story of people who are constantly on the move, of people who have fled because of war, because of famine, because of danger. I think of Ruth and Naomi, desperate for safety and stability and food, traveling to foreign places just to find refuge. I think of Joseph in the New Testament gathering up his young family, including the baby Jesus, and fleeing down into Egypt after they've heard that Herod seeks to kill baby Jesus. And I've been praying repeatedly Isaiah 2 this past week, that we would all be able to realize the vision of beating our swords and our guns and our tanks and grenades into plowshares, and that peace would reign. But there are two passages I encourage you all to reflect on this week. The first one is the story of Moses, and the second one is from Esther. Moses, in Exodus 17, in Exodus 17, we see the Israelites fighting for their lives, fighting for their land. And Moses, who's told that if he keeps standing with his staff up, that as long as he is staying steady, then the Israelites will win. And so he's up on the hill as Joshua and the Israelites fight down in the valley below. And Aaron and Hur come up with Moses up to the mountain. And as Moses becomes weary, they bring a stone for him to sit on. And as his arms become heavier and heavier, they physically lift up his arms, holding him until the end of the day as the sun sets and Israelites can claim victory. We have the opportunity to be Aaron and Hur in the coming weeks, to hold up our brothers and sisters who are being Moses in the midst of battle. We can lift them up first with our prayers. We can pray earnestly for peace, that calm minds will prevail, that Putin would come to his senses. We can pray for strength and endurance for those who are serving diligently during this difficult time, both inside of Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. We can pray that humanitarian corridors would be open so that aid can go in and out of Ukraine. Second, we can support them with donations. I'm thrilled that you all are designating the offering today towards the Ukrainian relief. And I ask that you continue to be generous over the next weeks, because as with many situations of crisis, you have a huge wave of support at the very beginning. But even if the war ended today, this would be months and months and months of need to be able to rebuild and to continue to be places of refuge for people. And so money is needed in great amounts to be able to support the efforts over the coming weeks. And there's another way that we can support, which brings me to the story of Esther. Last year, I preached from the story of Esther about Mordecai coming into Esther's chambers and telling her, "Speak out to the king. Your people are in danger. Use your privilege on behalf of your people." And Esther was going back and forth of, I would be in danger if I put my neck out there. But these are my people who are set to be sentenced to death. And ultimately she does. She uses her privilege. She comes out as a Jewish woman to the king and says, these are my people who have been decreed to be killed. Do not do this. I have been so overwhelmed by the West's response to the crisis over the past week. But this is not our only present refugee crisis. Though it's an exceptional time, and I in no way am saying that we should be distracted from the situation in Ukraine and that we should not be extremely open-hearted towards the people of Ukraine who are fleeing. And I praise God for that open-heartedness that we've seen in the border countries and from further west as well. But even as Ukrainians are being given green lights to come into every Western European country, including the UK, the UK Borders Bill is being discussed in Parliament, which would put into place just ridiculous restrictions on refugees coming into the country. And this is true. The EU is working on policy right now to make it much more restrictive to bring refugees in. And I can't even talk of my own country, which is doing slightly better with the new administration, but still, around the world, all of these countries who have signed accords that said, yes, we will be places of refuge, we will accept refugees in underneath international human rights law, are becoming more closed and more closed and more closed. And so I pray that we would also use our privilege. Use our experience, use the privilege that is given to us by our skin color, by the amount of money in our pockets and the passports in our pockets as well, to speak out, because we should not only be welcoming Ukrainian refugees. Just because they are white and European and Christian should not be why we are welcoming them in. It is because they have been forced to leave their homes, just like millions of others in the world. And to say only Ukrainians are welcome is to spit in the face of every Afghan and Syrian and so many others in the world who've experienced the same thing and who just want to be safe and to find a place of refuge. And so as we speak out, that we need to speak out for all refugees. We need to welcome all refugees. As we open those floods and say Ukrainians are welcome, we have to say that everyone is welcome as well. Because God says that everyone is welcome. And in every single one of those people is an imprint of God. So we can pray, we can give generously, and we can use our voice to advocate on behalf of refugees everywhere. It's a privilege to be with you all. As we say in my church in Vienna, we say, "Ihr schönen Menschen," you beautiful people. As you're gathered here today, I ask that you respond generously. Thank you. If you have any more further questions, I'll be around after the service. I'm happy to share more information on the situation. But thank you for allowing me to speak today.